Hello. It looks like we've got a couple people joining us already. Welcome, welcome. We're all a little bit early. We're early birds. I like to start early and make sure I get everything set up. So we're just gonna wait for our panelist and wait for other attendees. But welcome. We have a few more people that have joined. Welcome, welcome on this Wednesday evening. We're excited to learn about psychology and mental health. Hmm. We still got about 5 minutes till the webinar really gets started. But just know that this is a webinar where we encourage the attendees to ask questions. So you can go into the Q&A and ask questions along the way. And, I'll read them out to our mentor, and so she can read them or answer them. And we love participation along the way. You could also speak in the chat. Oh,
Hi there.
hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. We have about 4 attendees right now already here, and we have, I think, over 40 people registered. So,
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
yeah. How do I pronounce your last name? Bustos?
That's right. Yeah.
Perfect.
Listen, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you in Michigan? Do you live in Michigan now?
No, I'm in Washington State.
Washington State. Okay. So how's the weather there? It was chilly and cold in New York today.
Um, I don't know. This year it's so different, but it's just gray and cold and rainy.
Yeah, it was
Well,
drizzly and overcast here today.
yeah, I'm hoping it's supposed to be spring, but who knows when that's coming.
Who knows? Well, it's 8:29, so we're not even 8:30 yet, but let's give it a few more minutes for people to come on in. We're excited to talk about mental health and psychology tonight. Let's get started. So hi, everyone. I'm Maureen, and I am one of the partnership managers here at Polygence. And we're very excited that you have chosen to spend your evening with us to learn about psychology and mental health from our amazing mentor, Dr. Tatiana Bustos. Tatiana, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? And
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm happy to share my experience with Polygence, with mentorship, and just my overall journey in mental health psychology. So, I am my pronouns are she, her. I am a social research scientist for the state public health department in Washington. And yeah, should I start with my journey or just a quick introduction, or how would you like to go about this?
well, let's see. Yeah. So for everyone that has joined, this is an Ask Me Anything style webinar. So we encourage you to ask questions along the way. When there are questions in the Q&A, I will stop and kind of like read them along the way so that Dr. Bustos can like answer them as we move through the process. So that's kind of how the format's going to go. Please don't feel like you have to wait till the end to ask your questions. So yeah. So anyway, yeah, tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you find your way to psychology, community psychology, and being a mental health advocate?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, please ask any questions. Happy to answer anything along the way. So I'm a community college graduate. I'm originally from Miami, Florida. And I started at a liberal arts community college and just got my associates first. And I was taking a lot of social science courses, one of them being psychology. And I had taken AP courses in high school as well in psychology. And I thought it was something that was interesting to me, something that I wanted to better understand for my own family and background and what we were dealing with personally. And so it just kind of came together in terms of what I wanted to learn and what I wanted to understand from my own personal life. So so if you see there, after I got my associates in liberal arts, I decided to pursue a bachelor's degree in psychology at Florida International University. And As a psychology major and with a minor in sociology, I took lots of courses in psychology, ranging from cognitive psychology to forensic to I think there was a criminology course and developmental, social. So you get a wide gambit of coursework in different subdisciplines of psychology, which was really challenging for me to try to figure out which area I wanted to dive into. And I landed in clinical psychology because it was just the most interesting to me. I felt like it was something that I could make a bigger impact with. And so after I completed my bachelor's, at the time I was also doing research with a lab. So if you look at in my under internships and work experiences, I was volunteering as a research assistant for a health disparities and cultural identities lab, along with my bachelor's that I was completing at Florida International University. And I was learning a lot about how cultural beliefs can play a significant role in pursuing treatment, clinical treatment, public health services, going to a therapist. A lot of that can impact the trajectories that people take to actually improve their mental health and well-being. And so I found that that was phenomenal to me at the time to learn more about. And I was also at the same time, because I was a working student, I was working at part-time as a neurofeedback technician. So again, getting into that clinical insight into how clinical psychologists do their work. It was a private clinic. So I got a lot of exposure in that and decided to pursue a graduate degree in general psychology at Nova Southeastern University. And so I started with my master's, but I did apply for a PhD and actually didn't get in the first time. So the master, they had accepted me at Nova Southeastern University for a master's degree, and I decided to pursue it so that I can learn more. It would help me with my positions at the clinic. And so just really wanted to pursue that for employment, but also because it was something that I was genuinely interested in learning about. And my master's took a research approach. And so I got exposure to general psychological research methods. So instead of doing broad coursework in theory of like developmental psychology, I was able to dive into how do we research these types of topics in developmental psychology and social psychology. And so still got a wide spread of exposure to different subdisciplines, but just learned more about how one would research that type of topic. And at that point, I think I fell in love with the research piece rather than the clinical piece. And so I started doing work with Florida State University and the University of Miami. And I don't know how old people are on this call, but I actually found positions online through this really old format called Craigslist. It doesn't work anymore. But at that time, Florida State University was posting positions for bilingual assessors. I'm someone that speaks Spanish, and I was able to help provide us reading assessments for children who are in at-risk schools from pre-K to middle school. I was there for 4 years and landed it coincidentally because I was I was committed to finding an opportunity. It came across to be a great opportunity, and it was a really prestigious university. And University of Miami was also doing similar work. And so because I was getting that exposure with Florida State, I got pulled into other projects that were doing similar assessments for reading development, which is part of developmental psychology. All that to say, at the time, I was learning more about how I wanted to be more involved in the interventions that we were implementing. So, for example, I remember there was a mental health intervention that was being provided for high school students to prevent disparities in understanding its health literacy in a way. But I wanted to adapt the intervention in a way that was more responsive and relevant to high school students, whereas the PI, the principal investigator, wanted to keep it the same. And so we would go back and forth, and I didn't get the opportunity to change the way that I wanted it to change. And so I thought, okay, I would need to be that person. I need to be the principal investigator of this psychological program so that I can create it in the way that I want to create it and that works better for the community. And so I pursued my PhD again. This is my second attempt after working for about 3 years post bachelor's and master's, and finally got in. I got into 2 programs, and so I had options. I got into University of Miami and Michigan State, and I had come across going beyond clinical psychology and really seeking the combination of the 2, so clinical and community psychology, which takes like a wider approach to not just looking at the individual, like the person who is dealing with the mental health disorder, but also looking at the people that surround that person. So like their families play a role in their life and their mental health outcomes, their friends, the schools they go to, the policies they live among. So things like that were part of my training. And so I was really grateful to get that type of exposure in community psychology. And I see a question, so I'll take a pause and
yeah, I'll read it to you.
Okay.
I gotta put my glasses on. Some students are interested in psychology as a subject, but their parents may be afraid that the jobs will be not high paying or the jobs will be draining. What are the salary ranges for jobs in the field? What are your advice to students and parents?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question. So because I would say my training, my trajectory has been really, as anyone's journey is convoluted. It's not a straight line. You're usually trying here, there, going everywhere until you find the right place. And I came to learn that there's a lot of spaces for psychologists or people with psychology trainings. And I used to think that too, that there wouldn't be a high paying position for this type of work. And there really is a huge need after COVID and everything that's happened with our communities. We need people who are trained in that more now than ever. And the types of spaces that these positions can be in are research oriented, which is where you can find, there's different kinds. You can find grant funded positions. You could be working for the government. You could be working for a research institute. So, I work primarily for the government, and it's a pretty, well-paid position, higher than you would expect for a postdoc or something like that. And so I would say the salary ranges are pretty not, it's not, a vice president type role, but it's livable on the West Coast kind of range. And you can be in government. You can also be a clinical worker who is at an intermediary organization. So intermediary organizations are like a centered organization that does the research and provides services, and it bridges between a community and a university. So university is not typically always the only route that one can take, especially if you pursue a PhD. So it's actually really, really diverse. And the advice that I would say for students and parents is to keep an open mind to the types of opportunities that might come across your way. Leverage your mentors, because they also have other opportunities. They also have other opportunities to connect you into spaces that you may not necessarily think of. Networking is really important. So everyone's got, you never know who the person next to you, what kind of opportunity they might have next week. And so building and nourishing those relationships with others who are like-minded or have similar goals in some way. You want to keep that in line. I've also heard that keeping a person who is 1 or 2 steps ahead of you is always a good model. So if you see someone that inspires you, or you meet someone that inspires you that's in the psychology field, who is just, maybe they've just completed their master's and you're really looking up to where they might be heading, it's good to follow the route that person is taking. That's something that I was personally doing, just taking a look at broadly, and diversely where people were going after getting my training. And it was really helpful to get an idea on the variety of different paths that people can take. And then I hope that helps.
Yeah, I just have, there's another question, but before I read that question, I just also want to add, many people with psychology go into business, HR departments. HR departments have a lot of psychology majors, and you're making the money that you would make working for a big corporation. So, people that major in psychology, it's not just clinical or research careers. There's a wide variety of career paths open to you. Okay. Here's another one. Can you discuss opportunities counseling children and the education/degree requirements?
Yeah, I mean, I can discuss from what I know. I have a lot of friends who do counseling for children, specifically in treating children with autism or other types of children with special needs. And, I mentioned intermediary organizations. That is a really big space for people who want to work with children and provide services in that way. The degree requirements that I've seen in that space varies from, it depends on what level of involvement you want to be in that type of process. Like, you could always be a behavioral technician to be supportive in providing services. I've seen that in early learning initiatives, all over, that are affiliated with universities. But if you want to, lead the team or lead the BCBAs in some way, a master's is probably a better direction to take. I've seen more masters than I have anything else, master level counselors working with children. I've also seen them in school settings, so actually providing the services directly in schools. And I've seen less PhDs in that space, because you have opportunities to do lots of work with a master's level, and the education. I think I can't speak to what your coursework would look like. I think that really depends on the university and the program that you decide to take. But I imagine that you would be specialized in some way depending on the population that you want to work with.
Okay. Let's switch screens here. What do we?
Okay, so what is psychology? So psychology is a very broad field. It's basically the field that studies human behavior, human beliefs, cognitive functioning, and how that shapes beliefs and behavior. And so it's a really broad, and it also includes community and forensics sciences and many, many things, but it's essentially the study of human behavior and how your well-being is influenced by these key factors. And so there's lots of different spaces that you can actually be pulled into. I feel like psychology is an automobile, and everyone needs to carry out a certain function in order for us to fully understand our brains and our feelings and why we make the decisions that we make and things like that, or why we feel a sense of belonging in a certain community and not another. So there are different ways to define psychology, but those are the kinds of spaces that you can be involved in, the types of questions that you might find yourself asking about. Or you could even just be in service provision or HR, thinking about how people should be treated and providing recommendations for that and things like that. The second question is, why is the field of psychology exciting? So I think it's exciting for me personally. It was something that I really wanted to understand. My family deals with mental health challenges, but they're from a different country. And so that piece about cultural beliefs that I mentioned before was really fascinating, because I only knew what my family knew. And so being here and reading what's in this book was completely different from my understanding of what seeking out some mental health treatment was. There tends to be stigmatization in Latinx families. And so this book was of psychology. It was like an introductory to psychology. It was really talking about how cultural beliefs can mediate one's willingness to seek help. And so the reason that I found that exciting is because it was something that I saw myself in, that I wanted to learn more about. And as I started to learn about other subdisciplines like community psychology, that's when I also started to see myself in the sense where there's social justice work. There's an opportunity to be involved with communities that you might come from, that you also want to give back and provide support too, so that their mental health outcomes can be just as equal as everyone else. And so those are the types of things that excite me, the opportunity to help and increase one's well-being in terms of mental health, sense of community, sense of belonging, whatever the case. So that's really what drives me. And I feel like this field of psychology really offers that, that opportunity for you to be able to give back to the community in a meaningful way.
What are some career paths within psychology?
Yeah, so I can speak to the ones that I have been in. So I have been a consultant where I'm providing research services in some way, where I'm leveraging theory frameworks into how a certain program might be implemented better for a specific community. So there are opportunities for private business in terms of being an independent consultant or actually starting a small business and growing in that way. I've seen lots of psychologists do that type of work. There's also, I have a friend who also runs his own business, and he provides services for children in schools. So someone mentioned interest in education and counseling for children. So you can also run a private business in that way. Maureen mentioned HR. There's also lots of opportunities in government, state, local, federal government. There's opportunities for social science researchers, where you can leverage your psychology training and actually apply it in different ways. There are opportunities for direct service provision, and then also for research, if you want to take that direction. So there are opportunities there. There are nonprofit research institutes, which are really broad. So you can go, there are research institutes that provide services and are affiliated with universities. So it's like a combination of the two, like the intermediaries. And then there are research institutes that are nonprofit, but completely dedicated to research activities. So you really have to make a decision about whether it's service provision that you really enjoy or the research aspect of psychological theories. You can combine the two, but it's always best if you have a preference for one or the other. I feel for me, it was always research.
Okay, and what's the difference between like the PhD, a PsyD, a master's?
Yeah, so the PsyD, I think the PsyD is really in service provision and clinical work and treatment. I have some friends who have a PsyD, and our trainings were completely different. So they were, doing a lot of internships. They were going to I have a friend who's in a hospital right now, and she has to complete an additional year of her internship being a clinical psychologist in that setting. For me, because I took the research route in psychological sciences and community psychology, it was fully research focused for the PhD. And I was also fully grant funded. So what that means is that when you decide to pursue a PhD, there are opportunities for you to have that funded for you if you find a project, a grant, a federally or state funded project that can pay for your tuition and your time there at the university. And so I was really grateful to have a fellowship with that funding availability to me as a PhD. The other thing that is a major difference is that you are primarily doing research projects. So you're training in academic publications. You might be leading a team for research type of activities. I'm still involved with clinical providers. Like I was still doing work with early learning initiatives, people who were providing service provision out in the community. But what I was doing is providing services to demonstrate their effectiveness or some ways to improve their services through research. So it was kind of a step back in terms of direct services. Other differences, I believe the mentorship is the same. So with a PsyD or a PhD or a master's, you still have someone who is there advising you in some way. The master's level was much less hands-on. And so I didn't necessarily do my own independent research project as a master's student, but I did my own independent research projects as a PhD. I had multiple projects at times and needed to complete a dissertation, which was primary data collection. The master's is more just preparing you as a scholar with theories, concepts, methods to prepare you for the career that you want to pursue. It was really shaping the skill sets that you can use for a workplace setting rather than a PhD, which was fully research oriented. Other differences.
Okay.
I think that's, yeah.
Okay, let's go to this one. Let's hear about like your journey to psychology. I know that you've mentioned that you have, you were connected to psychology through your family, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what sparked your interest.
Yeah, I have to think back. So that I remember taking my first course in high school, my AP course in psychology, and I ended up passing that course, so that was great. But it was the first time that I was reading about those course concepts and principles, and I also enjoyed reading. So something about psychology is that you have to learn a lot about different theories, frameworks, disciplines, and so it was something that I found enjoyable. I enjoyed reading about those things and trying to find ways to apply them to either my life or people that I knew around me. So it was very applicable, to real world. Sometimes you can't find that with certain types of theories in social sciences. And so that was something that I always appreciated. And let's see, trying to think back. So in college, I remember taking the really clinical piece where it was about cognition and brains and the neurons and how they function and how that affects memory, because that is an important aspect of psychology. And I remember thinking, that's not the direction I wanted to take. I wanted to take a step back and focus more on the social science piece. And so that was something that was sparking my interest. The idea of trying to understand social situations, social context, all that mattered in trying to understand someone's well-being and mental health, like the way that they live, the way that they are brought up in their family, all that matters. And so I was really passionate about context and trying to understand something in terms of where it is and how it was shaped in some way. So I always appreciated that. And, taking a step further, moving away from broader psychology and into community psychology, my passions, were really deep into community support, community social justice, serving the underrepresented populations that we want to support. Because if we think about psychology, we don't always think about the disparities that are prevalent, particularly with COVID right now, but that was always there before. And so community psychology really takes a deeper dive into disparities work. Like, how can we fix or support a solution to address these issues so that there is equal access to mental health services and that we are reaching our greatest potential as people, as a community, no matter what race or ethnicity or other identity that we have is. So that's really what sparked my interest for that field. And I just took I dedicated my whole life to it. I'm a community psychologist to this day. So those are the key pieces that have sparked my interest.
Okay. So, what was it like obtaining your PhD? I know you mentioned before that you did not get in your first go round. So again, in the 3 year, I think you said it took 3 years. In the 3 years between the first time you applied and the second time you applied, like, what were you doing? And how do you think, did you change what you wanted your PhD to focus on in those 3 years?
Yes, I did. So there were lots of changes. So when I didn't get in my first time, because I was trying to apply as an undergrad, so I was just finishing up my bachelor's, and I didn't get in. But I did apply for master's just as a backup, or not just as a backup, but those are things that I thought I was prepared for. Like, if I wasn't selected for the PhD, I was definitely prepared for a master's degree. And so I did at the same time. So I'm just making sure I had something to pursue. I knew I wanted to do higher education psychology. When I was first getting my applications in, I remember that I did want to pursue clinical work. I was, I wanted to focus in on mental health services. That was just all I wanted to do. And my interests were really in disparities between certain communities, so Latinx and brown and Black and brown communities, and how mental health outcomes are affected by perception of or racism or perceived discrimination among providers. That was a really specific content area that I was focused on. I wanted to look at how providers were treating patients and how that may have been impacting mental health outcomes. And so during that time, I was finishing up my master's. I started getting that work experience with Florida State and University of Miami that I had mentioned before. And that's when I started to notice, the interventions, like just providing interventions isn't enough with the communities that I was working with the kiddos that I was working with. And so my interest started to change into wanting to learn more about ways that we can sustain programs or services in a way that it doesn't matter whether we're there or not. I want a program, a mental health treatment program that is out in the community and they can continue to support independently and along the way. And it can be focusing in on disparities in some way because it's embedding those values of the community themselves. So I started to it was more of a soul searching process. And because I started to care more about designing interventions rather than just examining service provision, I started to pursue completely different PhD programs. So I was no longer pursuing clinical psychology programs or health psychology programs. I was really applying for community psychology programs. That is exactly how I described it, that they focus in on sustainability. They focus in on ways of creating programs that look like the community or that are feasible for the community to continue to implement independently of the researcher or the clinician or whatever. So it completely changed. I was working that whole time in between the years because I felt like I needed to get more experience. And yeah, so I just spent those years. I also was building my relationships with the people that I was working with at Florida State. So they were professors, and I was trying to be smart about it and really introduce myself, have them get to know me, because I was thinking this would be a recommendation letter, possibly later on when I would choose to apply again. And I can't remember why I applied again, or the courage, or where I drew that courage, because I honestly don't remember, but I'm so glad I did it, because I remember being heartbroken, not getting in the first time and not feeling good enough. And I had worked so hard for 3 years that I thought, why not try again?
Yeah.
So I was really building up through my graduate studies and the jobs that I had in order to prepare myself for another jump for a PhD application.
And the fact that you worked in the clinical field and then moved to research, how much do you think your experience in the clinical aspect of psychology affected the way you looked at your research and pursued research?
Yeah, I think so. I had worked in the clinical setting for a very long time, and I have, we're still friends to this day. I was there for so long, and I was just a behavioral technician, just helping put the tools for the neurofeedback therapy. And I had expressed to them, it was all clinical psychologists in the office, and I remember I had expressed to them, tell me everything you know. How did you get here? Like, I was always very vulnerable about having them tell me about their professional experience, so that I knew enough to decide whether this was something that I wanted to pursue. And I think that gave me the professional experience that I needed, in talking to people and making people comfortable, because I worked with very, very different clients. I worked with children with autism. I worked with people who had bipolar disorder, a wide gambit of people with clinical diagnoses. And that was comfortable for me, so I think it gave me that skill set where I could approach and work with different types of communities, and really gave me that insight about myself as well. Because sometimes you might find that you can't do that, or, this is really hard, I don't want to do that. but I was always able to soothe people. And they always told me I should have been a clinical psychologist, but I just decided not to at the last minute. But I think it built up that ability to my next job, my next position that was directly working with kids and providing reading development services instead. So I would say that it just was a foundational experience that built me up for the next phase towards research.
Okay. And so when you finished your PhD and you graduated, you now work for the government. What did you do after finishing your PhD? Like, what got you from graduation to your government position now?
Oh yeah. So when my PhD, so my dissertation, I'm really interested in the community piece and how people engage and collaborate with communities, and how, so being a clinician, how does your position as a clinician impact the relationships that you can build with community members? That was my research interest. Like, that was something that I was deeply committed to studying and what I did a dissertation on. And I found a position with the government that was exactly, it was to a T, which was exactly describing what I was already proposing in my dissertation. So really thinking about values of community relationships and how that can engage them in wanting to engage with public health services or other types of behavioral health services. And I found the opportunity there to directly apply the skills that I had fostered through my dissertation. And I got the position before I graduated. So I was defending in July, which means that I was just defending my dissertation project. Like, it was the final presentation to confirm the findings that I had presented to a committee. And I had already been applying to this county and received the position right before my defense. And so I actually went right off into employment before I even graduated. So I didn't get much to do. I didn't have much time to do anything else other than work, but I did have the ability to apply directly what I was learning here into a different space within the government agency.
Okay, great. Okay, let's switch a little bit and talk about the value and importance of mentorships. So can you talk a little bit about the mentors that inspired you?
Yeah. So I love this slide because I actually haven't had a moment to sit and look at the mentors that have inspired me in my life, but I was able to locate these pictures. So Dr. Dion Stevens was actually the first person to ever tell me that I should pursue a PhD. I had no inclination towards doing that in my whole life. No one had ever told me that before. And she was the undergrad position that I was volunteering for, the Health Disparities Cultural Identities Lab. This was the professor that was leading that work and gave me the opportunity. And she saw potential in me and was actually helping me build out my resume. I didn't even have a resume. I didn't have any idea about what the interview process was going to be. Like, I had no understanding of that whatsoever. No one in my family completed college. I'm the first. And so she was really, pivotal. I would say she changed my life, to really be honest. She changed my life completely. And I would have never pursued that first time or that second time without her really showing me what kind of potential I had in me that I wasn't even aware of. And so she actually drafted my first resume, gave me my recommendation letter, told me how to find recommendation letters. I didn't even know how to do those types of simple things that people may take for granted. And so she really gave me the foundational skills to apply myself in challenging ways that I would have never considered before. So very powerful mentor. Dr. Amy Drahota and Dr. Maji Halamariam were both my mentors in my PhD program. So Amy was my advisor. So she helped me from the very beginning to the very end in terms of getting my milestones completed, the research projects concrete and done, because a good dissertation is a done dissertation, right? So not thinking too broadly beyond what we needed. So she always kept me grounded. on completing my goals, and very, very supportive in the sense where she trusted me to be a leader. She never questioned, what I was doing, but really trusted in letting me lead projects independently. And that ended up, I thank her to this day, and we are very close, but she really showed me that I could lead independently. And so now I'm never afraid to just start a project. If they just throw me into a project, I'm already used to that kind of environment, so I'm ready to take that on and lead. Dr. Majihola Mariam is, a very close friend and a mentor. And I mentioned how you always want to have a person who's 2 steps ahead of you. She is that person that is always 2 steps ahead of me, and I'm always just checking in on her, what she's working on, how she got there. So a close friend of mine, but also a powerful mentor for me to see, because she's an academic researcher at Michigan State University, and she has a social work background, so she does both. But she applies for grants. She's always building out new partnerships in Africa. And so just really, really invites me on papers, like we are on projects together to this day. And so keeping me involved and keeping my foot in the academic world, which is really great for me to maintain in my career as a government employee as well. But everyone here has played a very unique role. Dr. Dion Stevens basically, built this career for me, and she probably is not even aware of it. And but very, very important. But Dr. Amy Drahota and Majihola Mariam continue to inspire me and keep me on my path. If there's ever a time where I'm feeling like, oh, I just can't get this project done, or I don't really think I can do this, they're the ones that I call to this day, and they can remind me of the potential that I have and the capacities that I continue to carry because they've seen my work and the quality that I bring. So yeah, those are the powers of mentors.
Okay, and then tell me, why did you become a Polygence mentor?
Yeah, so because a mentor changed my life, I want to change someone else's life. You never know what resources someone doesn't have, and what providing them with those resources can do for their life in the longer term. Even if it doesn't happen now, it may happen later on, and you'll remember me. So I want to be that person that gave me that for my future, and I really love building the capacities of young scholars because I see myself in a lot of the students that I work with. I see myself, I identify as a 1st generation college graduate, and I see myself as being that bridge to help students, move forward and have those resources and have that insight that they may not necessarily have from anyone else in their support network. And so it fulfills me to give back in that way because it was given to me.
Super. Okay. Well, can you talk to us a little bit about the mentees that you've worked with at Polygence and the projects that they've done?
Yeah. So I have worked with few students who are really interested in psychology. So because I have that background in mental health and treatment and services and populations, a lot of my students come in with that research interest and wanting to understand. I had someone who was interested in wanting to understand mental health disparities across different populations. I have a current student right now who conducted a survey because they wanted to understand the disparities among South Asian immigrants and how demographics related to generational status can influence wanting to seek mental health treatment. Then I had another student who was really interested in public policy and how collaboration is needed between public policy, politicians or policy contexts and researchers. And so I've been pulled into different types of spaces where I get to focus in on collaborations and partnerships, but also leverage my expertise in psychological background and theory. And some of the projects, I don't know if I mentioned this, so there has been a research paper, there has been a blog series, multiple blog series that focus in on the numbers that we see, the statistics that we see on mental health outcomes and treatment among different populations. And the last one is an actual primary data collection. So someone is administering the survey with a group of individuals that they sent the survey to understand their mental health seeking behaviors. So yeah, lots of different kinds of projects.
Interesting. Okay, so before we jump on to the next slide, I just want to take a moment and just divert a little bit to COVID. And like, what are your thoughts? How much has COVID really just affected people's mental health, or is COVID really just, removing the blindfold so that we can see, people's mental health easier? Like, it magnified it, or did it actually, worsen people's mental health?
I think both, and probably depending on where you sit. So like if you're someone who has never experienced any of that, it might be a magnifying experience to see these disparities for the first time. But if you're someone that lives with those disparities and you're part of that community, it's something that has been happening for years and continues to happen to this day. But I also think COVID has worsened a lot of our mental health outcomes across different individuals. I mean, I've seen it. If we talk about the public health workforce and government employees, there's a significant burnout, cases of burnout happening, which, if we think about burnout, there is anxiety, depression, all these, really painful experiences that continue to happen beyond COVID because people were rapidly responding to community needs. And now it's difficult because COVID is over, but not really, but the pandemic is over in terms of the rates increasing rapidly, but we still are feeling the consequences of having an overworked workforce, or the children who had to continue to be remote and hybrid, and how that situation is impacting their developmental outcomes. And so there's a lot happening right now, a lot of research happening right now about those types of impacts that are definitely worsening, unfortunately. So a much needed area to focus in on, for sure.
Okay, great. Okay, let's see. I'm interested in psychology. Like, what advice do you have for high school students who are looking to explore the psychology field?
Yeah, so I think if you're looking to explore the psychology field, and if you're a high school student, I would definitely advise taking either a course in psychology, an introductory course in psychology. You can either take it as an AP course if you're able, or even just taking a community course in it. You'll get a lot of exposure in terms of what types of disciplines are in psychology. I think that's the hardest part about trying to understand where you want to go, because there's so many different areas. So if you want to be involved in the cognitive piece, the biological piece, or the social science piece, that might be a good starting point to decide on. But even then, there are sub-disciplines there. So just explore an introductory course to get a better understanding of what direction you might want to take. Also seek out a mentor who is in the psychology field, or volunteer maybe in a space where you can get opportunities to talk to other people who are involved in psychology. I had a student who was able to intern at a neuro clinic, not a neurofeedback clinic, but some kind of neuro research clinic, where she was able to network with the people around her to learn more about neuropsychology and whether that's the direction she wanted to take, because she had already gotten exposure to social science aspect of psychology. So that's another opportunity. You can just intern and find mentors that way.
Okay. And how might a research paper, like one they would do at Polygence, help students towards a career path in psychology?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I always say that the research projects in Polygence always give you the foundational skills that you need to build out a scholarly career. And so you'll find that, in college or in grad school, or even in your final career position, you have to write a lot, and you have to justify claims, and you have to know how to identify evidence to support the claim that you're making, and review literature and statistics and things like that. And those are the types of things that Polygence gives you exposure to, at least working with me. I have students read research papers and tell me, where is the evidence and what are you seeing and what is this telling us, so that you can think critically about what you're reading in terms of the psychological findings. And so those types of opportunities are what can really build a career path in psychology. Unfortunately, you don't get the direct clinical exposure, but you at least know what the evidence is and how to interpret and critically assess it, so that you can make informed decisions later on in your career.
Okay. And what resources can you supply to students who are interested in exploring psychology?
Yeah, so I shared a YouTube channel. There's a YouTube channel that has a lot of introductory information on what kinds of subdisciplines are in psychology that I keep mentioning. So I can share that. I also shared a video on, what is community. So YouTube has some really good educational channels that I can share after this call. But there's a lot there to say what community psychology is. The American Psychological Association has lots of resources for people who may be interested in learning more about psychology. So one thing that I will say is that there's a national organization for psychology. So it actually is a network for all of us. So if I'm in the community psychology division of the American Psychological Association, there are others. There's about 108 or something like that, 108 divisions. So this is, a national network for us all to connect with one another. And if you check out that website, it's really helpful to take a look at how many areas you can go into for psychology.
Okay, great. Does anybody, we still only have those 2 questions in the chat. Does anybody have any other questions that they want to ask before we kind of wrap up? I'll give it a few minutes. If you're interested in working with mentors like Selena, you can join Polygence. You can go on the Polygence website, click my account, and then complete an application. You can also reach out to me. My email is maureen@polygence.org. And I can talk to you about getting connected to admissions. I can answer any questions you have, anything like that. Our next Ask Me Anything is going to be in 2 weeks from tonight, and it's going to be on chemical engineering. So that's exciting. But does anybody have any other questions? Or Tatiana, is there anything that we didn't think to ask that you think would be helpful for students, parents, college counselors who are guiding students? Oh, we got a chat. Oh, we got a thanks all.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would say that I get a lot of questions from students is, whether a research internship is a good idea for them, because Polygence offers that exposure to doing your own research project independently. And they're always asking about, what other internships are there and what do you get out of that? And I always like to share the story of, that I volunteered as a research assistant for the Health Disparities Cultural Identities Lab. And what I did there was, I didn't describe what I did there, but what I did there was actually interview people for research projects to get an understanding of, their cultural beliefs regarding certain types of treatments. You also get exposure to transcription, lots of qualitative research skills. But other types of research projects get you other exposure into clinical settings and how certain types of treatments are provided and differentiate between groups. So research internships are actually a really phenomenal way of building up your resume for higher education, or for if you want a more important role in a position, a career position. The research internship can give you a leg up on that.
Okay, so we have a question. How common is it with psychology to go into medicine, take the MCAT, etc.?
How common is it with psychology to go into medicine? I'm not sure. So
I actually think it is very common. Yeah, psychology questions are on the, I'm pretty sure they're on the MCAT. I know a few kids that the plan was to go pre-med and they majored. I do think they double majored, but I know a couple of kids that psychology was one of their double majors.
Oh, that's great. There's also psychiatry, but that's a completely different area.
But I think that's once you're in med school. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, we're going to wrap up early and give everyone back a few minutes of their day. Thank you very much, Tatiana. I really, really appreciate learning about your journey and hearing the advice. Wait, we got one more. Hearing your advice, but before we go, what were some tough times with the classes you took throughout college?
Yeah, I think tough times. So I think maybe if you mean the hardest courses, for me, the hardest courses were the biological aspect of psychology, which is why I didn't decide to pursue it. It just wasn't something that I was really vested in. So I remember taking that one of the courses twice the semester following. But being a working student was also really hard because I was juggling the coursework, the research assistantship, and then also my part-time positions. And so that was obviously a challenge, but I mean, if you can or be organized and really prioritize what you need to focus in on throughout your time, it'll work out. But that was probably the toughest, to try to learn how to prioritize coursework and studying and all those things with the other responsibilities that I had to juggle as a working student.
Okay, again, thank you for all this information, for telling us about your journey and giving us advice and insight into the field of psychology and mental health. Everyone that joined us, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope we see you again in 2 weeks for our chemical engineering mentor journey. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.